Welcome to the Neurodiversity and Higher Education Podcast. My name is Ryan Palm, and I am the Executive Director of the Brad McGarry Center for Neurodiversity at Mercyhurst University in Erie, Pennsylvania. I'm joined on this podcast by some amazing students from our program here at Mercyhurst who are helping with the behind-the-scenes element of this production. This podcast aims to be a resource for those who are interested in the intersection between neurodiversity and higher education. Whether you are a prospective student, family member, or someone working within the sector, we are glad that you're here. Over the coming months, we will bring on a variety of thought leaders on topics relating to neurodiversity and higher education, with a particular emphasis on the transition into higher education and the transition from higher education into the workforce. We very much value your feedback on suggested topics, speakers, or thoughts on our episodes. We can be reached by email at neurodiversity@mercyhurst.edu, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll also put some additional information in the show notes about how you can connect with Mercyhurst, as well as this podcast. Thank you for taking some time to join us on the podcast today. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different, as this will serve as both a bit of a recap and look back on our first season, as well as a look as to what's ahead of season 2. If you're maybe a little bit confused and this is the first time you're hearing us talk about seasons of this podcast, well, you're not wrong. This is a new concept, and as we'll talk about in our time together today, this podcast was really an experiment to see how it would go and if it was something worth continuing, and we're happy to say, yes, it is definitely worth continuing. If you're watching this on YouTube, you may also notice there are less graphic enhancements compared with prior episodes, and that's because we're really just keeping this episode fairly simple. The student support that helps make the beautiful effects of this podcast possible, well, that student's still getting their feet wet here in the new semester, so we're going to give him a break and not ask him to do too much on the polishing part of this show. That's my fault, not theirs. So I want to start today by talking just a little bit about a reflection on season 1. I have an outline to hopefully keep me on track, but this is by no means scripted, so I hope you'll indulge with the more intimate nature of our conversation today. When I think about our first season, and what is my biggest takeaway is that there was a lot of really good things that happened throughout our time together in this first season of the podcast, but there's also a lot of room for growth, and that's what we'll talk about in much of our discussion today. I want to be transparent up front. I really had no expectations about where this podcast would go, how well it would do, if anybody would listen, if anybody would notice, all of those things. I had some thoughts, some unofficial goals, if you will, as we got going. For instance, I hoped that we would publish an episode twice a month. In my mind, that was fairly realistic. I knew weekly was going to be way too much, but I thought we could figure out twice a month. Well, it turned out my schedule and the schedule from the students that are helping didn't always allow for twice a month in terms of a cadence. And in fact, we sort of settled into a groove of one time per month as being the ideal fit for everybody's capacity. Much of that slower pace, if you will, is on my shoulders, as I'm the one who's responsible for reaching out and trying to schedule a guest. I'm the one who records the podcast and provides that information to our student support. So I take much of the blame for the cadence not being what it was. That said, anybody who knows me personally and knows a lot of our programming, I often use the phrase progress, not perfection, or don't let perfect be the enemy of progress. And quite honestly, I'm thrilled the fact that we got 7 episodes out and we more or less maintained a monthly cadence during the last school year. That's really exciting. I love that. I was worried in the beginning when we started that perhaps we'd run into some stumbling blocks. Things would get busy, both for myself and for our student help, and we may not make it through a full season. We might quit halfway through, and I'm glad to report that certainly was not the case. When I think of some of the highlights of season 1, I loved the fact that I got to work with a couple students who made the behind-the-scenes work happen. I've mentioned them previously, Jack and Gia. They're great, they're wonderful, and we're thrilled to have them back with us for season 2. I think all 3 of us have grown in our ability to produce high-quality products that make this podcast what it is. I've learned a lot as the leader of our team, in terms of the importance on specific and detailed instructions, providing deadlines and timelines for when we expect the materials. And I genuinely believe that I personally can do much better as the leader of our team in practicing those techniques. When we think about how we support neurodivergent students here at Mercyhurst, we really talk about the importance of deadlines and structure and guidance. We also talk with our students that in the real world, when they go off into their professional jobs and careers, they may not always get that detailed guidance, that structure. It's something we talk about when we help train employers about how best to be neuro-inclusive in their workplace, but it's not perfect. And I can see that throughout our time together, those last school year, I was imperfect for sure. But I want to make progress. So Jack and Gio, when you listen to this, you can be anticipating some greater level of detail and instructions from me that will hopefully help us collaboratively as a group improve a bit. Another big picture takeaway is that I really enjoyed the conversations that we had on this podcast. I've heard Tim Ferriss, who's a very famous podcaster and investor, make a comment over the last couple of months that something along the lines of if you start a podcast and you find value and you enjoy the conversations that you have, then does it really matter how many people listen and download or how many financial sponsors you get? And I would agree with that. Throughout our time together on this podcast, we've had 7 amazing guests, and I've really enjoyed those folks. They come from a variety of backgrounds and interest levels. Some have done lots of podcasts. Some, this was one of their first. And I really enjoyed the time together. And each time I look down at the running timer that is here in our recording platform, I was shocked how fast it was going. I think in today's day and age, most people thrive on a 30 to 45 minute podcast as opposed to the longer formats that you might hear from other podcasters. And so I try to be very respectful of the time. But there were many moments when I had to cut short my list of questions or the topics that I wanted to cover, trying to keep on that time constraint. And that's okay. The conversations were valuable. I've got some pretty good feedback from individuals who enjoyed those conversations. And I'll talk a little bit here shortly about my hope and expectations for what season 2 might look like in terms of topics. What I think is important to impress is that there is a growing and perhaps rapidly growing sphere of support for neurodivergent humans who want to pursue higher education and employment. And that's really great. And so in some ways, there's an overwhelming number of potential guests that we could approach. I'm trying to find folks who are a little bit more neutral. They may not work at one particular institution, or they may not promote one very specific agenda, but rather folks that their topics, their experience, their expertise can be a little more broadly reaching. And I think we had that with some of our guests this season. It won't always be that way. Eventually we'll run out of those truly neutral arbiters, but I think we had a really good start to the year so far. A final big takeaway on our first season was that promotion of the podcast was very poor. And that's entirely on my shoulders, something that is really my responsibility to try and do. And I didn't do it very well. And that's okay. Again, progress, not perfection. I really, truly consider this a very important area of growth and opportunity for myself and for our team for this upcoming season. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. I want to be very open and candid that we have no expectations in terms of how many people listen to this podcast or what their feedback is like, or does it drive enrollment? Does it drive revenue? Does it drive sponsorship dollars? None of those things have any kind of standard or set goals or expectations. Instead, we see this podcast as a vehicle to have conversations, to help get the messaging out there that there are support opportunities available for students who are looking to go to college and for students who are looking to enter the workforce. We know there are many resources out there, but sometimes finding those resources or knowing where to start or where to implement them can be just as challenging. And so that's what the point of these conversations are. Whether 5 people listen or 5 million, we're excited to have the conversations. I need to do a better job of trying to get these conversations out to the world and telling people they exist. So by all means, consider this an unofficial call to action. If you know somebody or a group that you would be willing to share this podcast with, please feel free to do so. And even more importantly, perhaps, if you have suggestions on how we may push out our brand, get these podcasts, these conversations to be heard by more people in hopes that it can help them, please send me that information. You can email neurodiversity@mercyhurst.edu. You can Google Mercyhurst and Neurodiversity. You'll find me fairly easily. I would love and welcome any and all suggestions on how best to get our messaging out to a broader audience so that more students and their families can learn about the many support opportunities available for these important transitions and the intersection between higher education and neurodiversity. So now I want to take just a few minutes talking about what we are thinking about for season 2. Again, when we started this podcast, we did not label the first episode 1, season 1. The seasonality piece really took hold towards the end of last school year when it became apparent that we could use a break in terms of the podcast schedule, that our students had other obligations during the summertime, and so too did I, with travel and some conferences and presentations and the like. And so it became a nice little unexpected structure to this podcast to create seasons. And going forward, I think our seasons will align well with the academic school year. So as I record this here in late August, maybe it's released late August, maybe early September, we'll see. It's really timed with the beginning of a school year. Beginning of the college school year, but also the beginning of high school years. As we know, many of our listeners, their families are probably high school aged, and we want to be supportive of that community. So the seasonal nature of this podcast will keep going, I think. I also don't know that it really matters to the average listener. If you're anything like me and you listen to a variety of podcasts, sometimes time is irrelevant when they actually come out. So some of our content going forward will be a little more timely based, we hope, based on certain times of the year, certain times of the application cycle, certain times of the employment cycle. But we're not going to focus too strongly on that, knowing that sometimes schedules are just hopes and aspirations rather than a reality. So when we think about season 2, the hope is to really get to the cadence we started out originally hoping for, which was 2 episodes a month. During season 1, we managed to get 1 episode a month, and there were times when I was tempted to squeeze in an additional episode, but we decided not to force things. But I believe producing 2 episodes a month is very realistic. In the beginning, at least, I think our cadence will be something along the lines of one of those episodes will definitely have a guest. I don't want this to be a podcast all about me and my opinions. Instead, I would much rather bring on true experts in these spaces to share their experiences and their expertise with you all. One of those episodes each month may be a solo episode. It may be based on an article, on a show that's come out. It may, something other than me pontificating for a long period of time. But we may not always have a guest in that second episode. Where we can have the stars align and we have 2 guests who are able and willing to appear and we can get the editing work done and all those pieces, then we're going to try to make that happen. But my commitment, again, is progress over perfection. So if that second episode each month is a little bit shorter, maybe focused on a particular topic, then we're going to do that. And I think it'll be great. We would really like feedback from our listeners. Is twice a month enough? Is it too much? Is it just right? What does that look like? We would love your feedback on the difference between an episode with a guest versus an episode that might cover a specific topic. Sometimes we have guests that align perfectly for a particular topic. Sometimes maybe not. We have a lot of experience and expertise here at Mercyhurst University, our Center for Neurodiversity, and our AIM program that has been around for 18 plus years. And we want to share that expertise with you as well. So if there are topics that are of interest to you as a listener or the families you work with, please feel free to send those to us again. When we think about the guests that we hope to have for the future, it more than likely will again be a bit of a variety. We know there are a growing number of resources to help families find support at the college level and beyond. These can be databases, they can be consultants, they can be events, all of those different things. And we want to continue to raise awareness of what those look like. So sometimes bringing on a guest who's part of an event, who's part of a platform, who's part of a consulting group will help open some eyes to that very specific thing. But oftentimes those individuals have lived experience. They have, shared experience with others. They have a background in that space, and they have much to offer besides simply promoting one event or one program. So I think you'll see a lot of that going forward. We also want to increase our focus on the transition from college into the workforce. When we started this podcast, the idea was that the 2 topics would be fairly split. The idea of transition into college and the idea from transition from college into the workplace would be about a 50-50 split. We didn't hit that objective in season 1, and I think that's okay. I don't have any stress about that. We lean a little more on the admission side, getting into college and college preparedness rather than career readiness. But I think we're going to try to make our best effort to even that balance as we go forward in season 2. When we think about season 2, we're also going to look to have a few more topical episodes. So we might take a big topic and try and break it down over a few episodes. So we might think about a series on something like college preparedness or career preparedness. It might be really hard to cram in everything you need to know in a 30 to 45 minute episode. But instead, if we can take a few of the key points of that big, broad topic and spread it out over a series, I think that might be an effective way of delivering a larger amount of information in a way that perhaps is a bit more consumable than a very lengthy or overwhelming podcast. Again, we would love your feedback on this. I've said before on these shows that I am a really big podcast listener, and I really come to enjoy some of those series that take a big picture topic and progress over a multi-week period. So it's something that works well in my brain and how I learn, but I would love to hear from you if that's something that appeals to you as well. So stay tuned. I also have some ideas on some mini series where they may be shorter episodes, 5 to 10 minutes, that cover a very specific topic. Maybe it's timely based on what's happening in the school year. Maybe it's a reaction to, something that has happened recently in the news. We'll kind of play those by ear and see how they go, but the hope is to create a variety of different vehicles so that folks can listen and learn as we go along. Finally, as we wrap up our thoughts for what season 2 might have in store, I want to be a little more bold and aggressive in terms of, a peek behind the curtain. And so I want to share some goals. Goal setting is a very big part of what we do at Mercyhurst and our support programming for neurodivergent learners. Sometimes it's a very small, modest goal, like getting to the gym one time or going to our study sessions that we host, or maybe sitting with a friend at lunch. Other times they're larger, more audacious goals, like getting an internship or joining a club and becoming a leader in that group by your second year. So I think it's only fair to create some goals for this podcast and our team, and also to share those in a sense of vulnerability and openness and transparency, and also a little bit of accountability. Sometimes we talk about the role of accountability with goal setting, and so I'm putting this out into the world to have an accountability buddy as we go forward. So as we think about goals for this podcast for season 2, I've come up with 5 of them and a bonus goal. When I think of goals, I try to think of things that are roughly around the SMART goal framework. Hopefully that's familiar to you. Specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely is how I approach that. So each of these goals has some specificity to it. I'm not going to lose sleep over it if we don't hit these goals by the end of our season 2, but it helps to have something to strive for. So our first goal is to publish 18 episodes in season 2. So that's roughly 2 episodes per month over the season, if you will, which kind of runs the academic year of 9 months. That goal has a little sub-bullet to it, which would include 9 guests, a minimum of 9 guests, meaning sometimes it can be easy to say, I can't find a guest, I'll just turn on the microphone and ramble for a while. I don't want to do that. I want the emphasis of this podcast to be bringing on expert voices. And while you're stuck with just me today, I hope that's certainly not the norm. And instead, we have a good variety of guests that come your way. So goal number 1, publish 18 episodes. Goal number 2, implement cover art for each episode. We have an incredible student named Gia who's done some really cool things graphically to help promote this podcast. I don't always do a great job of getting Gia the information she needs to do her magic on the creativity side in time to publish an episode. And so I'm going to try and do better. As we bring on guests and we introduce topics, I would love to have specific cover art so that when the podcast episode shows up in your player, the little icon that shows up next to it is specific to that episode rather than just our general overview. Why is that? This goes to my preferences as an avid podcast listener. I really enjoy when I'm hearing someone talk to be able to see what their face looks like. That seems silly, but I enjoy it. And so I figure we might as well bring something I enjoy to our podcast as well. I can't promise it'll always happen. I certainly can't promise it'll happen in episode 1. As I've mentioned, we're publishing this episode right at the beginning of the school year. It's a hectic and chaotic time for everyone. So it may or may not happen for episode 1, but my goal is by the time we bring on a guest for one of our first episodes, that we have the infrastructure in place to make that happen. So that's goal number 2, implement cover art. Goal number 3 is to reach 2,000 total downloads and listens for season 2. So a little inside baseball, we had just about 1,000 listens during our first season. Again, I had no idea what to expect. I think that's pretty good, but I honestly have no idea. And to some extent, it doesn't matter. Our approach at Mercyhurst and the way we promote our support programming is always about quality over quantity. We truly believe in trying to get our messaging, our programming, our support efforts to the right audience rather than trying to have a billboard on the highway or publish an ad in the New York Times. And that's our approach with this podcast. Downloads and listens is one metric, but another metric that matters a great deal is when I hear feedback from families that we work with. And during our summer programming and our new orientation for students on campus this summer, I heard from a number of our families who said they really enjoyed this podcast. So A, thanks so much for listening and telling me that. And B, just know that we're eager and active to try and grow it, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, but it's certainly not the only metric. That said, our goal is to double the number of listens for season 2. I think that's fairly realistic, especially if we publish double the number of episodes, but that growth will also rely on me doing a better job promoting the podcast. And if you can recall back to 10 minutes ago when I talked about our recap from season 1, that was an area of definite growth and opportunity. So goal number 3, reach 2,000 downloads and listens for season 2. Goal number 4 is to procure some swag or giveaway items to promote the podcast. I've had this idea in my brain for weeks and months and just have never done it. So I'm going to make it happen by talking about it here in the public. And my goal is to have some of this on hand very soon. And anytime I see anybody who provides a review, whether that's on Facebook, whether that's on Instagram, whether that is on the podcast player itself, I would love to reach out and be able to send you something, whether it's a sticker or a pen or something along those lines to say thanks. I also plan on having some of those items when we go to college fairs or transition fairs. So if you're at a fair and you see Mercyhurst is there, feel free to ask if you have any podcast swag. And if we don't, give that person your name and contact information and I'll make sure you get some. So goal number 4, get some swag and giveaway items. Goal number 5. As mentioned, growing this podcast is an important piece. It's not the only piece by any means, but I would like to try and do so. So a goal relating to this podcast, but also a personal goal, in full disclosure, is to try and be a guest on 5 other podcasts to promote this podcast. As I mentioned several times, I'm a very avid podcast listener. I listen to lots of podcasters who go on other shows to promote their work and their show, and I want to steal a page of that playbook. So if you host a podcast that's adjacent to this space that we're talking about and you think I might be a good guest, please reach out. I'd be happy to be on your show. If you have suggestions on other podcasts that you listen to that are in this domain that you think I might be helpful to help, educate their audience about support programming at the college level for neurodivergent learners, please reach out. I would love to make some connections. So goal number 5, try and be a guest on 5 other podcasts to promote this episode. And I have one bonus goal. It might be tough. It takes some planning, might take an additional piece of equipment, but I think it'd be really fun. So my bonus goal is to record an episode with an in-person guest. More than likely, that in-person guest is not going to be here on our campus. It's an expert out in the community, whether that's here locally, regionally, maybe it's at a conference, who knows? But so my bonus goal is to record an episode with an in-person guest. I might need an additional microphone. I might need some other equipment to make that happen, but I'm up for the challenge. Earlier this summer, a colleague and I had the opportunity to present at a conference run by the National Association for Colleges and Employers, NACE. We gave a presentation on some of our career efforts focused on our neurodivergent students. Happy to share information about that with you if interested. As part of that conference, they had an expo hall, like most large conferences do. And there was a team from UConnect and Career Anywhere who was running a podcast session right there in the hall. and I had the chance to make a quick appearance on that. And I really enjoyed that. And I told them right there on the spot, I kind of want to steal this idea and try it myself somewhere. So that was part of the inspiration. And I've seen podcasts and listened to podcasts from events as well. So that's a bonus goal of mine, is to record an episode with an in-person guest, perhaps at a conference. So just to recap, 5 quick goals. Publish 18 episodes, season 2. Implement cover art for each episode. Reach 2,000 downloads for season 2 episodes. Get some swag, some giveaways, something to help promote the show. And then try to be a guest on 5 other podcasts to help promote this particular podcast. And then my bonus goal is recording an episode with an in-person guest, perhaps at an event somewhere. So I thank you for joining us to hear about our reflections on season 1, where we've learned, where we've grown, what we want to try and do, some thoughts on how we improve for season 2, and where we think we might take the podcast going forward in the future. I'm really happy that you're here with us. I'm hopeful that you'll stick around, that you'll stay with us through season 2 as we explore some new endeavors, we find some new goals, we meet some new people, and we learn a bit along the way as well. Thank you for listening to this episode. We're grateful for you joining us. If you haven't already, please be sure to check out our past episodes from season 1, and we would appreciate it if you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your episodes. We hope that you'll subscribe, and if you haven't already, be sure to tell a friend. We're really trying to help more people find this podcast in hopes that it helps them on their path towards helping their neurodivergent student find experience in college or the workplace or wherever they end up. Thanks again to Jack and Gia for your support on this podcast. And also a friendly reminder to stay tuned to updates from the Brad McGarry Center for Neurodiversity at Mercyhurst by visiting our website, mercyhurst.edu/neurodiversity, or check the show notes for our social media feeds. Thanks for joining. Until next time, Carpe Diem.